Welcome, everyone. It's Angelo Robles, and welcome to Family Office TV and my private membership group, SFO Continuity. AI trends and predictions for the future. Now, many of you know I've been really hitting upon this topic, especially my members with my private content, very, very heavily the last couple of months. And I'm thinking back years ago when I interviewed Adam Robinson about this topic, and I tend to be pretty good at seeing around corners and looking to the future, both for investment opportunity and things that are going to be game-changing. I do have a tendency to be a little bit too quick. I'm not saying I'm perfect, but about a year and a half ago, the fine gentleman that I'm interviewing in a second, Dr. Craig Kaplan, was a guest. We revisited, because it has been a while, AI. And it was a really deep discussion about the history of AI, even going back to the 1800s and Ada Lovelace, and really more applicably in the 1950s and progressing. So from a little bit of a historical look, we kind of have been there and done that with Craig. There may be elements of it that will be applicable that we bring up today. And many of you know that I had Craig on several times in order on AI and investing just 2 weeks ago. Those were effectively 100% or near 100% investing centric. Go back to my Family Office TV and look at them. We did a clip of one of them, and one of them was exclusive to my members only, where my members get a lot of proprietary, unique content with guests like Craig and Ram Ahluwalia and Adam Robinson and others that is really very hard-hitting, gloves off just for them, and provides them what I hope is incredible insight on investing and beyond. So today we're going to be more broad than just investing. And on that note, let's get into it. The field of AI is evolving rapidly, and it's difficult for researchers in the field, not to mention investors and family offices, to keep up. Dr. Craig Kaplan has been researching AI intelligence systems since the 1980s, and he's also a retired hedge fund manager. In this segment, Kaplan provides an overview of the field of AI, including the most recent developments, including progress in areas like large language models, AGI, which is artificial general intelligence, and Safe SuperIntelligence. So join us, because there's lots that is happening, and the impact, I'm telling you, the impact on family offices and really society, but why would family offices not be a part of that, is truly very, very important. It's been stated by Elon that he thinks AI will be 800x more powerful in 2 years. Sundar Pichai, the CEO of Google, stated it could be as impactful as fire and electricity. And I also interviewed, it was a short interview, but I did interview the iconic Ray Kurzweil a couple of weeks ago, and basically reiterated and acknowledged and has been predicting much of this going back decades. If you don't acknowledge, let alone invest in, but utilize AI, it's undeniable that you're going to be behind the times. You're going to be replaced by a human that is actively utilizing AI. Now, we'll talk a little bit about what the future, and maybe not that so far future, may look like, because there's several well-known billionaires that are not even in tech that are stating in certain businesses they feel that AI will replace CEOs. 10 years from now, I guarantee you, single-family offices will look very different. I'm creating, to a degree, a bit of a foundation, a blueprint, an opportunity to follow, to be connected to thought leaders, to stay ahead of the curve, so family offices can remain incredible, and the people that work in them, at least for a quasi-foreseeable future, are going to be employable. On that note, and a little bit of an onerous tone, I didn't mean to make it that way, welcome back, Dr. Craig Kaplan.
Angelo, terrific to be back with you again and talking about my favorite subject, which is AI. So I'm looking forward to a fun and hopefully a useful discussion.
And on that note, to give a little bit of context, especially if this is the first time that some people are seeing you, on my platform for our family office and investor audiences, provide a quick overview of your background relative in AI and uniquely AI and investing.
Sure. So I've been interested in AI since the 1980s. I did my doctorate at Carnegie Mellon University and worked with Herbert Simon, who was the Nobel laureate that was one of the founders of the field. So 1956, there was a conference at Dartmouth where the field was named, and there were 11 scientists there. He was one of the scientists that helped name the field and present at one of the very first AI programs. So that was before I was born, 1956, but I came 30 years later and also studied with some of the folks that pioneered machine learning, which is the current form of AI. And I've just been fascinated by it my entire career, which has been spent mainly developing intelligent systems. And as you mentioned, I did run a hedge fund for a while. We built intelligent systems for financial services, which is how I got into that. So sort of the intersection of investing in AI, but sort of much more so on the AI and intelligent system design piece is really where I've lived for essentially my entire adult life.
How has AI changed since you began working in the field, Dr. Kaplan, back in the 1980s?
So I think it's helpful to understand there's sort of two main approaches to AI that have happened sort of sequentially. So if you go from, let's say, 1956 to 1986, those first 30 years, that was the era of symbolic AI. A lot of people may know the term expert systems. And the idea was that you programmed rules into a computer to get the computer to behave in intelligent ways. And it's essentially the benefits of that was that you could understand very precisely why the computer did what it did. But the disadvantage was it didn't scale very well. It turned out that people know so much information that AI researchers sort of ran into a brick wall where they just tried for decades to try to get this approach, this rule-based or symbolic AI approach, to sort of reach the intelligence even of a 5-year-old child, and they just couldn't get there. But then in the 1980s, what happened was there had been already for many years this idea of machine learning. Machine learning is, instead of programming rules into the computer, why don't we have the computer learn on its own? Just throw a lot of data at it and have an algorithm that helps it learn. And then that way we don't have to have an army of researchers and programmers trying to put in all the rules. We'll just turn the computer loose on all this data. And that approach is what has ultimately proven to be most successful. The problem was in the 1980s, computers were so slow that it took them a really long time to learn things like recognizing the letter A. But now, because of Moore's law and the speed up in computing, those algorithms, as well as some algorithms that have been improvements, now with the larger amount of computational power, we can have self-driving cars, we can have ChatGPT, basically all driven by this machine learning approach. So if you step back and look at the sort of, 50-year view, there was symbolic AI where you program it and tell it exactly what to do. And then there was machine learning where it learns. The problem with machine learning is it's not exactly clear what the machine has learned and how it's going to behave. So it's unpredictable and it's a little bit of a black box. And so we'll talk more about it, but I think there's a way to bring both of these approaches together, which is kind of where the field's going now. So it's just been fascinating to watch, and it's been this evolution over time.
What are some of the current challenges facing what I guess I would define as AI researchers?
So I think that one I just mentioned, sort of the name for that, lack of transparency or the black box nature of these AI systems is a major challenge because it makes them unpredictable. And if they're unpredictable, you don't know what errors they're going to make. You don't know if they're going to say something that's completely wrong or make something up, which is that phenomenon researchers sometimes refer to as hallucination.
Mm-hmm.
And they talk about models hallucinating. The AI just says something that sounds great. I was at a conference speaking on AI, and for fun, OpenAI just released one of their latest systems. I think it was a GPT-4 Turbo version. And I asked it to write a speaker bio. I said, make it sound very impressive, but don't make anything up. It has to be very accurate. And it made it sound very impressive, but it had me going to Stanford, and it had me, the head of this company that was in Russia that had nothing to do with AI. I mean, it just made things up that sounded great. And the audience said, wow, that's a pretty good, bio, but half of it was fabricated. So we're kind of at that phase. And that's one of the major challenges is we have to get greater transparency and we have to increase the reliability and trustworthiness of these systems.
Now, I don't want the audience to relax and assume, per my opening comments, that what you just said, knowing much more than me, that, oh, this sounds like it's decades away. I'm very safe. What we're describing with how chips are enhancing, if I factor in things like Moore's Law, how that's going to be exponential to what Elon and Ray Kurzweil and others said, and how literally I can make the comment, AI will never be weaker than it is this very second on a Monday, July 15th, that we're doing this interview. So to correct the hallucinations that you mentioned and other inherent weaknesses in AI, okay, it may not happen in a week. It's not going to take years.
That's right. So, this is one of the challenges that affects investors. It's an important thing for investors to pay attention to, but also just everybody. And that is the exponential rate of change. So human beings are not wired. We're not wired to, make sense of exponentials. Most things that we see in our everyday experience are more linear. Something was trending along and it's going to keep trending. And the idea that it just takes off like, the hockey stick, that's not really something that comes from our natural experience. In terms of computational power, so the simplest way to increase the intelligence of AI and the power of these systems is just to throw more computing power at it. And so you have Moore's Law. Moore's Law has held true for many decades and is basically the observation that computational power doubles roughly every 2 years. Okay, and that's because you could fit more and more transistors on the chip and so forth. But more recently, NVIDIA, so Jensen Huang, right, the CEO of NVIDIA, now has a law named after him called Huang's Law, which is that computing power is doubling roughly every year. 1.08 years is sort of the math on it. So it's twice as fast as Moore's Law. And what that means is that in 10 years, whatever systems we have right now, you can imagine that in 10 years, we'll have systems that are more than 1,000 times more powerful. And some people think it's even greater than that. That's just powered by the increase in computational power. That doesn't count improvements in better data that we feed them. It doesn't count improvements in better algorithms for processing the data, simply brute forcing, more computational power and having things double. So you can imagine if you're not quite happy with GPT right now and it's making things up, how about if it's 1,000 times smarter? It's going to have a lot of the problems fixed. But I also think that there's some very important things that have to be done. And I have some strong feelings on this. Hopefully we'll be able to talk about it, having to do with the architecture. In other words, just pushing the same approach to AI that has been successful over the last decade, in my view, is not the optimal way to go. It'll get us there. We'll get smarter systems, but I think there's a better and safer way to go than that.
What are some of the important recent developments in the field?
So the field, large language models, which is what most people are familiar with, that's ChatGPT and Bard and Gemini and so forth, Grok, Llama 3, you may have heard, or your audience may be familiar with some of these models. They're basically, you put text in, either typing it in or speaking, or in some cases, they can process images as well. And then they can give you output that sounds relatively intelligent. And this approach started with everyone looking at it as kind of just this tool. And basically, the common understanding was it's like a prediction machine. It's not really intelligent, right? In quotes, not really intelligent. You're putting data in and it's just probabilistically figuring out that the next sequence of symbols that it should spit out is XYZ. And I think what's happening now is people are realizing that we're going to need more symbolic reasoning and more planning, more kinds of thought that's more sequential and logical and that can handle multi-step problem solving, the kinds of things that humans do. Those machines were very good at giving you sort of stimulus response, and they could even spit out entire paragraphs or, hundreds of pages. But it was all, you give it a prompt, it gives you the response. It wasn't doing very much reasoning to get to its answer. It was more just, it had all this knowledge and it was putting out what sounded like a good response based on what it was trained on. Once you add reasoning and planning, you'll have a whole completely different, much more powerful system. And so that's where a lot of the research is going. And related to that is a uptick in interest in a topic that's been around for a while, but now is becoming very, very hot. And that is AI agents, where these programs actually have autonomy and can sort of act as agents on your behalf. And you've seen, and we may talk about this, a number of acquisitions by large tech companies in this space. And I actually agree with it. I think that is the future. And in particular, figuring out ways for the agents to work together. So those are some of the trends that we're beginning to see now.
I mean, back a little bit as well to what I said earlier, many industries, got caught off guard by the rise of e-commerce, definitely social media, and kind of on-demand everything, music, movies, data processing, food, etc. There is no question AI will be much bigger than all of that. And look how everyday life, even for many elders, that social media is, their mobile phone, the internet. I mean, Craig, it's just hard to imagine that within probably 2 to 3 years, we're not going to see significant developments that could lead to some challenges in business and society, all things that we'll get into. But in whetting the appetite for the audience, maybe you could prime that road a little bit.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. The pace of change is going to be unlike anything that we've seen. And most of the technology that we're familiar with in the past, it's sort of innovated in a particular way. Even something like the iPhone, okay, so it's helping you communicate better and keep track of your schedule better, and does a lot of things, helps you be more connected, but it's in one area. But AI is a very general purpose technology. It's intelligence. We're talking about intelligence. So it's kind of closer to as if we had contacted an alien form. We didn't contact it, we invented it, but it's sort of like an alien form of intelligence that is going to be, even if it isn't right now, much smarter than you or I by a lot. And what could that intelligence do? It could affect every single field, right? Not just communications, like with an iPhone, or not just, accounting, not just the legal profession, not just HR, it's going to affect everything, medicine, because you basically have a superior intelligence that's being developed. And we can go into why it is. And, it sounds all very hypey. I understand, because there is a lot of noise in this field, but the fundamental things make it very clear to me. I mean, we could go into it, but you have memory that's so much larger than, human intelligence memory, and you have processing ability that's so much greater. And you're now have a universal interface where you can understand natural language. There's so many things that have happened that just, to me, are like a neon sign flashing and saying, it is coming, and it is coming fast. And to your credit, you've had some folks like Ray Kurzweil who've been aware of this for many years. Back in 1999, everyone thought it was 100 years away. I've heard him talk about this, and he's like, no, 2029, that's when it's going to pass the Turing test. And, he's going to be much more accurate than most of the professional researchers in the field, even 10 years ago.
And basically simply defining the Turing test, it's the capability of interacting and not even knowing whether it's a human or, let's go with the word, an AI agent. We're kind of there on certain things already, but I admit, being placed on hold and getting various AI systems are definitely not where I want it to be, but it's inevitable. And probably his guesstimation, like 25 years ago of 2029 or so, more than accurate. If not, if anything, it might even be a year or two quicker. From an investing perspective, one of the most frequent questions I get, and I'm sure you get as well, is it a bubble? Now, again, a broken clock is going to be right twice a day. There are conditions that can lead to the market being overhyped and then waking up and it's down 10, 20, 30%. We could look at the bubble in 2000 in technology. So broadly, is it a bubble and is it overhyped?
So, I mean, bubbles are a natural part of financial markets. And there's been research, Nobel Prize winning research of actually creating bubbles in laboratory settings. So, people are beginning to understand that these things form. There's irrational exuberance, greed and fear have their cycle. The underlying technology is real and incredibly transformative. I would say more powerful than any innovation I've ever seen in my lifetime, or that I can really think of, even going back in history. So that, in that sense, it's not a bubble. There's also a timing consideration. With bubbles, what stage are you in forming? I'm sure there will be bubbles in the AI field, just as there were with internet companies back in 1999. And when they popped, you ended up with what was real was left, right? So the same thing will probably happen here. I don't think we're anywhere close to the bubble popping. I'm sure there will be one or more bubbles that pop, but at the end, what's going to be left is going to be many times more powerful than sort of what was left at the end of the internet bubble, because the underlying fundamental technology is game changing, and there's just no way around that. So you try to be careful. You try not to do foolish things like putting all your money on one unknown, AI startup or something like that. Use good investing discipline. But I think in your intro, you were absolutely right. You can't sit this one out and just wait, because it's going to run right by you.
Yes. And again, for those that want a more investment-centric conversation, and there'll be aspects of it even continuing that we will include here. Craig and I gave near an hour and a half dedicated to investing about 2 weeks ago. Simply go on Family Office TV and watch that more investing-centric in AI. And by the way, that was investing-centric and getting potentially exponential returns all in public markets. Now, the members of my SFO continuity got a private session after that, where more than just the obvious NVIDIA, Google, Meta, we went into more of the thesis and reasoning, but a lot more intimate plays that are still in public companies with even greater exponential returns, which is why, of course, you have to join SFO continuity. That's where all the real information to take action is, at angelorobles.com. It's easy to figure out, and we have amazing, amazing members so far. I'm going to read actually a question from one of the participants. You might be able to see it in your version of StreamYard as well. It's a little long, Alexander, but it's Alexander from Austria. Welcome, Alexander. Gentlemen, regarding semiconductors, Moore's Law, I learned from a scientist, actually a neurobiologist, he states, that semiconductors, as we know today, have reached a dead end. We need a semiconductor 2.0 approach, a new technology. Give you a buzzword, neuromorphic computing. Craig, what is your call on this?
Okay, so there have been calls for a while, sort of just like Nietzsche said, God is dead. There's been Moore's Law is dead. And that's, I think I've even heard, NVIDIA reference this. The thing is, don't underrate ingenuity. So when you reach the limit of fitting transistors in 2 dimensions, then what happens is they go to 3 dimensions. And when 3 dimensions looks like saturated, then they come up with new techniques that can kind of get the same effect a little differently. So there's still innovation going on in the chip space. I'm not a semiconductor expert. I try to kind of keep an eye on it just to be somewhat abreast of what's going on. So I know they're continuing to make advances. The questioner, Alexander, is correct that at some point you reach sort of fundamental laws of physics. There's only so much you can do because you're down to the size of an atom, right? And electrons, and there's certain physical properties that you can't get around with that same architecture. Neuromorphic computing, I'm not 100% sure I know what he's talking about, but I think what he may be referring to is there's an effort to develop sort of computing that is more similar to the way the human brain works. So what's amazing about, one of the many amazing things about the human brain, but one of them is you get such great computational power at such low wattage. I mean, compared to these data centers, even though they can do many more operations per second than a human brain, on a power consumption basis, I mean, your human brain is really doing pretty well because it doesn't take a lot of power and it gives you a lot of, computational intelligence out the other end. And so there are people that are experimenting with different architectures that are sort of closer to the way that neurons work. It's human brain obviously is much slower. Neurons fire on the order of, 10 milliseconds. And you can do so many computations in a supercomputer in 10 milliseconds. It's amazing. So there's very, large differences in the architecture. I think probably my general point that might be most useful is to say, don't get too hung up on the fact that, well, we're reaching the limits of physics on stacking chips in the way that we've known, because there's other components that come in. There's innovations in the entire stack. So it's not just the chip, it's the architecture, how you're programming the chips, how you're using the chips, how you're modularly hooking them together. It takes a long time to train a model, but then you can shrink it down to a much smaller size and get most of the benefit out of that smaller size. So there's a lot of different innovations in the ecosystem of which the chip is just one piece. And so I wouldn't get too hung up on that. I think at least in the short run, meaning like the next 10 years, I don't see anything really slowing down because of physical limits. Maybe certain pieces will slow down, but other approaches will compensate. And that's really what NVIDIA has done with high performance computing. They've said, look, there's a certain kind of, limits to the old architecture with CPUs. We're going to go to GPUs, and then we're going to build an ecosystem around that. And they've managed to just, as I said, actually increase the pace at which things are doubling, right? Which is not what you would expect if we were reaching the limits.
Of course. And thank you, Alexander, all the way from Austria. We do love Alexander, and we do love our international audience. We have some in Africa, the Middle East, obviously Europe, and of course, I hope, maybe a couple in my backyard here in North America. Recently, there has been a lot of tweets and media coverage about the dangers of AI, as well as AI optimism. Where do you stand as more of an AI doomer or boomer?
I like that. I like that distinction. I think of that as well. You have the boomers that are basically saying this is the best thing ever and let's go full speed ahead. And the doomers that are saying this could destroy us all. So first, I just want to say that even the boomers, right? So I would put Bill Gates in the boomer camp and Sam Altman at OpenAI, clearly very enthusiastic and, wanting to develop the potential of AI. Even folks like that, as well as many other business leaders and top AI scientists, have all signed a statement from the Center for AI Safety, which you can find online. Dan Hendricks, I think, is running it out of Stanford. And it basically says that AI should be considered as a potential existential threat on the same way that we consider nuclear weapons or pandemics. We need to give it that same level of attention. And I think that's correct. I think it is a potentially very dangerous technology. And I also think that chances are it's all going to work out fine. If you ask me for my odds, I'd say, it's 80 to 90% that it's all going to be great. And this is going to be the best thing that's ever happened to humankind. But there is this 10 to 20% chance that it could be really bad to the point of actually even wiping everyone out. And when you think about how bad the bad part is, even if the probability was very low, like 1% or 0.1%, it's too high because the impact is so big.
The consequences of it are devastating.
But
part
you
of
can't.
the challenge of that, and I don't disagree even with your odds, is that we may follow certain guidelines from a moral and democratic society, but we have some enemies around the world, and maybe they feel the way that I'm going to talk about them, they feel that about us too. But I look at North Korea, Iran, and others where we may want to follow, let's slow down and do things properly. They want to kind of dominate the world and get rid of US, what I may define as hegemony and dominance. And are we all going to play by the same rules? Boy, that doesn't seem realistic.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And so one example of that, so you're in great company. Jeff Hinton, right, who was sometimes referred to as the godfather of deep learning or the godfather of AI. He was one of the cognitive scientists that pioneered the algorithms for deep learning, which is the basis of everything we're doing. He worked at Google, helping DeepMind. And, he retired from them relatively recently so that he could speak his mind. Not that Google was doing anything nefarious. They're actually, I think, trying to be quite responsible. But he just wanted the freedom to say what he thought. And he saw that there was a big danger. So he goes around and he tries to raise awareness of the danger. And at the same time, when there was a letter from the Future Life Institute saying, let's have a pause, let's have everybody stop, he actually did not sign it for exactly the reason that you said, Angelo, which is he said, look, if the US stops, China and other countries are going to go. If one company stops, others are going to go. This is the idea of stopping it is probably not realistic or even pausing it. And I think he's absolutely right about that. I think it is good that that letter was written and that it raised awareness and that people, realize that, wow, maybe there's some things we need to pay attention to. But in terms of practicality and saying in Silicon Valley, Angelo, as you and I both know, Silicon Valley is built on let's go and get there first and move fast and break things, right? And so that culture is not one of let's go very, very slow with something. So what's needed is, I don't think you can fight it. I think it doesn't mean that all is lost. And in some ways, the debate between the doomers and the boomers is sort of wasted energy, because you can argue about what the relative risks are. You could argue about whether we should pause it or not. None of that matters. People are going to go forward. What we need to do is design it to be safe. It's that simple. Design it to be safe. And it can be designed to be much safer than it is right now. And you have a lot of really smart people working on it. My company's been working on that. So that's where I would put the focus, is let's not try to argue about whether we should or shouldn't do it. It's going to happen. So let's make it as safe as it can be. That's really what we can do. And we can do that, I think.
Well, I guess you walked right into my next question. What can we do about AI safety? What's the current state? And more importantly, where do we need to go from here?
So if we go back to sort of one of the big challenges right now with large language models, for example, that lack of transparency. So if you have lack of transparency, that means it's hard to trust that the model is going to do the right thing. That means if you distribute it widely and some bad actor says, how do I make a bioweapon? Maybe they've trained it enough to not answer that directly. But if you get clever in how you ask the question, you could probably get it to give you the answer. And, there's lots of people have sort of shown that that's true. And so it's coming from the fact that you don't really have visibility into how the system is working. So it's unpredictable and you don't know what answer it will give under what circumstances. And as a result, it's a very strange situation. We've built the thing and then we're trying to test in safety after the fact. And, I had a background in a prior life. My first job out of grad school was IBM. And I ended up writing a book on software quality. And what I learned was an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. If you can design something, it's 10,000, IBM found this, 10,000 times more cost effective to design the code right in the design phase than to try to fix it after you ship. 10,000 times. The same thing with AI. Trying to test in safety after the fact is the wrong approach. It's the best we have if you don't know how it works. You got to do something, but it's not the right approach. What we need to do is figure out a better architecture, a better way of creating the systems that is not so black boxy, where we have more transparency into how it works. And then you can design it way back in the design stage to be safe. and then you can just test to verify that it is in fact safe. And that is definitely doable. And that's where the whole field needs to go. And if there's a drum that I'm pounding, that's the drum, because I think people are just beginning to realize that, oh yeah, maybe we can do that. I think they were caught by surprise that these systems they developed ended up being so intelligent. No one really expected that GPT would be as good as it was. And so there was a little bit of a reset. Oh my gosh, this thing is smarter and we don't quite know how it's working. But if people keep focused on the point of let's design it to be safe, then I think the next generations will be much safer, much more transparent, much more understandable. And that's really the key place we need to focus.
We have a question coming in from Gordon. How do you determine early or easily identify programming biases of the various, he's very specific here, AI engines being developed?
Okay, so that's a great question. So again, with foundation models or large language models, for people in the audience that aren't AI experts, maybe think ChatGPT, they are trained on huge volumes of data. Think 3 Library of Congresses worth of information. And it's more than that now, but in the early models, it was like 3 Library of Congresses worth of information. So what data you select, and by the way, there was a lot more than 3 Library of Congresses that they started with. And then the researchers sort of filtered it down and said, we think that, we'll go from 300 Library of Congresses down to 3. And that reduction was filtering out what they thought was noise and junk, and also maybe some unethical kinds of things that were in there. And so the first step would be to do a very good job of filtering the data that is used to train the models. And this goes back to sort of the thing that every first-year computer science student learns: garbage in, garbage out, or good stuff in, good stuff out. It's just like a child. What you expose these learning algorithms to, they're just going to pick it up. I mean, that's what they do. It's programmed to sort of detect the patterns and to then emulate that. So if you give it a bad set of role model examples in the data, then don't be surprised if you get bad behavior out. So first line of defense, try to do a good job of cleaning the data. It's very difficult to do right. But I would say that the longer term answer, and that's with existing state-of-the-art models, that combined with then testing after the fact, that's pretty much what we got right now. But fast forward a couple of years, and I think you can actually have a different kind of architecture where you can have many different AI agents. And we can talk more about this because it's a little bit of a complicated answer, but there's ways to get human values into lots of agents in a democratic way so that they serve, just like in our democracy, as checks and balances on each other. And to me, that will be a much safer approach. And we could talk more about that if we have time.
Yeah, I mean, there have been calls to halt. We kind of discussed this a little bit, or pause, why don't we call it, AI development. Do you agree with that, or is there a different approach? You somewhat answered it in my question prior to me noting Gordon's question, but I think it's going to lead us into kind of the meat and potatoes of my questions and our discussions moving forward till we get to some investing in more business, what I call practical use, towards the end.
Sure. So yeah, I have tremendous respect. There's folks like Max Tegmark, who's a professor of computer science at MIT, and also one of the co-founders of the Future Life Institute. I mean, he's really a visionary guy, and Future Life Institute came out with a letter relatively early on, not very much after GPT was released in November of 2022, basically calling for a 6-month pause on any development of systems more powerful than GPT-4, something like that. So, and that was the one that, as we talked about, Jeff Hinton said, well, but, if we pause, the other guy won't. And even Max, to his credit, he's got a great bumper sticker. I don't want to scare people, but he says, guys, he's interviewed, right, with Lex and other folks, and he said this publicly, says, this is not an AI's arms race. If we're not careful, this is a suicide race, because each person is sort of a race to the bottom. Each person feels like they can't stop, because if they do, the other guy will get ahead. And so therefore they're incented to just go as fast as they can. And because they don't have the safety protocols in place, this could end up very badly. I am not as pessimistic as that. I don't think we need to stop. I don't think that's realistic. I don't think we need to pause. I don't think that's realistic. I think what we need to do is be thoughtful, and we need to design it in a safer way. You have to do it in the design stage. It's just keep coming back to that. And it can be done. So that's why if I didn't think it could be done, you would have a very gloomy person on the other end of this call right now. But I thought a lot about it, and I see ways to do it.
I suppose so. Back about 19 months ago when I first interviewed you, I probably asked this question, but maybe your perspective is different. Now, of course, if you're part of the inside job here at the US, then you'll never admit it. But does the US government and the Chinese government effectively, in theory, they have an unlimited budget. They could kind of do what they want. What's to stop them from having more powerful programs than some of the public companies that we noted?
Well, I believe, without any special knowledge, no more knowledge than you really about this, but just from what I've observed, I'm sure they are working on it, both the US government and the Chinese government. I go to AI conferences and there's senior officials from the Department of Defense that are talking and encouraging the smart researchers to come talk to them after the talk. So, I mean, everyone is trying to make sure that the other side or the other country doesn't sort of get an advantage that is so great that it can't be overcome. And it's a very competitive thing. I am a little bit optimistic, partly because I see what's happening at companies like Meta and IBM that are leading something called the AI Alliance. And this is a movement to make AI open source. Now, there's a big debate in the research community about whether advanced AI should be kept very tightly closed and closed source because it's so dangerous and you don't want to put it out into lots of people's hands. I tend to agree with Jan LeCun, who's the chief research scientist over at Meta, and some of the folks at IBM as well, who basically are saying, look, it's safer if we have it democratic and we have lots of access to AI technology, and we'll get checks and balances, and we'll develop a healthy ecosystem without one party, having all the power. And also, I think it's very difficult for this to be concentrated just in one entity, whether it's a company or even a government as well. Finally, governments are in the race. And to bring it back to investing, because I know we both enjoy this topic. One of the things I love about NVIDIA is there's Jensen Huang. What a smart guy. So he sells to the hyperscalers, right? Google, Meta, Amazon, all these guys are buying as many chips as they can get their hands on. There's a shortage, right? And he realizes at some point they'll have enough. So who's bigger than a hyperscaler? A government. Yeah, and that's what he does. He goes to Singapore, he goes to all the governments, and he says, you guys need to have your supercomputer with your country's data because you don't want the other country to have it and be the only one. And I'm just like, wow, that guy is so smart. So anyway.
Well, interesting sidebar. On a brief kind of catch-up note from my perspective, everyone, it is Monday, July 15th. Tomorrow, I have a busy day. One of the things I'll be doing, for those of you that are hearing this live that happen to be in New York, I will be traveling from my rural-esque property in Connecticut tomorrow to New York. I may or may not be hosting a social soiree at a rooftop. It's going to be probably 95 degrees. If you're a family or family office who want to reach out, I have a couple of meetings that I'm hosting prior to that. So that will take me from mid-late afternoon through early evening. So just a heads up, I'll make more of these announcements on my lives, especially as I'm traveling through the year. So it's an opportunity to meet one-on-one. And this week, along with, of course, Craig, who I'm interviewing now, tomorrow, before I head into New York, at 11 a.m. Eastern, I'm interviewing probably among the most iconic and popular attorneys in the family office community. And we're going to talk about family office structures, about holdcos, private trust companies, and a variety of legal risk and challenges for family offices, including the Corporate Responsibility Act. So that is going to be on my socials, and specifically a webinar for my members and some more extended content. And that's tomorrow at 11 o'clock Eastern. Now, the day after, Wednesday of this week, so that puts us at the 17th. I believe it's 4 p.m. Eastern. and announcements are going out soon for my members with some special access, but some broad content that I'm making available with the return, his third time, former Green Beret E.M. Burlingame, where many of you know I'm apparently fascinated by sovereign risk and disaster preparedness. I'm deep into geopolitics. I do obviously tie that into the super rich in family offices, and that is one smart man. Also a man who spent time in finance, is very educated, and with, sadly, the assassination attempt on Trump, that will be something we'll bring up, some deep state concerns as well. So again, I'm not afraid to tackle subjects that effectively, in my opinion, everyone else in the family office world that has a pulpit, that has a platform, is afraid to kind of take a stand and have more open conversations. Let's say both sides of the aisle. Many of you know I did a debate last week. I like those kind of formats. I think they're educational. If you're wrong, you learn. You already know what you know. Why don't you attempt to know what you don't know? So I hope you're enjoying the content. But again, my members, go to angelorobles.com, are the ones that get a lot of the true deep content that is more concise, and the in-person programs, literally over 30, very intimate per year. Craig, I guess we're getting into a little bit of the heart of it now, and this will be a little bit of a long form question. We're beginning to hear about artificial general intelligence, AGI, in connection with some new high profile acquisitions. For example, Amazon just acquired executives from AGI startup Adept and is forming an AGI group. Microsoft acquired an AI company, Infliction, for $650 million in March of this year. Kind of, what is AGI? And do you have any comments specifically about those acquisitions?
Yes. So I think you're putting your finger right on, what's very hot right now. So AGI stands for Artificial General Intelligence. And the basic idea is that in the past, it was possible to have AI that was very good at a narrow area. Like you could have AI that beats the world champion at chess or at the game of Go, or even, make tremendous progress, much more than all human researchers have made in all of human history on protein folding. And what took humans, decades takes it, a few days, and it sequences it, figures out how to fold every protein that we know. So in specific areas, AI has been great. That's called narrow AI. And AGI is saying, what if we can kind of get this very high level of intelligence across any cognitive task, any kind of intellectual thing that humans can do? And for many years, that's been sort of the holy grail of AI research. And my company, IQ Company, has been focused on it, from the beginning. But it was kind of strange because when we first started talking about it, not that many people really knew what it was. And everyone understood I could apply AI to analyzing legal contracts or to, doing insurance or something. But how can you make it general? And then I think GPT came, and all of a sudden people realized it wasn't so far away. So the evolution, I think, that we're going to see is you had AI, just general AI, then expert systems, narrow AI in particular fields. Then you get artificial general intelligence. That's kind of what Ray Kurzweil is talking about. When you can pass the Turing test, you can trick someone at the other end of a computer who doesn't know if they're talking to a human or a computer. They can't tell the difference. That's the Turing test. So Ray says, 2029 computers will be so good, AI will be so good that it'll be impossible to tell the difference. Right now, you probably could still tell the difference if you asked enough questions and had some experience in the field. And after AGI, we're going to get into something called superintelligence or general superintelligence. So already we have very narrow forms of superintelligence. If you think of a chess program beating the world champion, it's smarter than any human. So that's kind of super intelligent, but it's just in a very narrow field. It's narrow superintelligence. Once we get general AGI, then we can have general superintelligence. So that's kind of the evolution. In terms of the acquisitions, so Inflection AI, so Mustafa Suleyman, who kind of was CEO and founder there, was acquired by Microsoft. And I think the deal there was they licensed, I'm not sure if they actually acquired the entire company, but they definitely got the head guy, Mustafa, and they got a license for 653 million, like you said, to sort of use all their stuff. And that was an example of the large tech companies like Microsoft and Meta, Google, all realizing, Amazon, that AI agents are going to be very, very important. And Inflection was good at developing AI agents. So just very quickly, what is an AI agent? You and I have autonomy. We act. If we had an assistant, the assistant could act on our behalf. So you and I are agents. The assistant would be an agent where we're maybe delegating authority to. So AI agents is similar to that. Having an AI that is sophisticated enough that you could actually delegate authority to it and have it act on your behalf, right? That could be an example of an AI agent. And this is sort of the next incremental step. It's been around for a while, but it's now the technology is advanced enough that we can actually have these things beyond just sort of Siri, which, you know, has a horrible reputation in the past. I'm sure it's much better now for like not really understanding you. And, you know, comedy skits have been done about that. So Inflection was very good at AI agents. And I think that's one of the reasons. The same thing with Adapt, which was acquired by, or at least the founders were sort of hired away by Amazon to start their AGI group. And same thing, they have some expertise in this new field of AI agents. It is possible, and this talks to a little bit about what my company's been doing and sort of the two themes of we need to design things to be safe and also it has to be powerful. I think that's what you have to have. You have to have the safest AI system is also the most powerful. If those things are together, then there's no problem because Silicon Valley and all the companies and all the countries want the most powerful system. And if the way to get it is also to be the safest, then we're good. And I believe that the architecture or the way to design that is to take AI agents, which more and more people are now realizing, and create a way for them to interact, collective intelligence. So Angelo, just like you have with your podcast and you bring in all these guests and experts, you are tapping the collective intelligence of humans and you're channeling that and bringing it to the audience. And we all know two heads are better than one if they're smart people, and a million heads could be even better. So that's all of civilization is built sort of on collective intelligence. And I've spent many, many years, decades designing collective intelligence systems to do things like get an edge in the stock market. So if you have AI agents that are in a collective intelligence system, if you design that properly, you will not only be able to have rules where you understand how the system works, which would make it safer, but you will also have a much more powerful system than any one of those agents by itself. That's where I think the field is going. These acquisitions are the kind of beginning indications that the large tech companies are beginning to see that, or maybe they see it already, and they're trying to get the talent to make that happen.
And speaking of that, recently in June of this year, 2024, Ilya Sutskever, the brains behind OpenAI, left to start a new company called the verbiage that you just used a little while ago, SuperIntelligence. Can you explain what superintelligence is, or yet again, or add to it, and why we're kind of hearing about it now?
Yes. So superintelligence. So Ilya, really smart AI researcher, studied under Jeff Hinton, was a collaborator of Jeff Hinton, was at Google, then was one of the founders of OpenAI, and then has now left to start his own company. I think technically the name is Safe SuperIntelligence Inc.com. And part of the reason for that is my company owns superintelligence. So we owned superintelligence.com back in 2006. That's how long we've been working on this. So that was taken, but that's okay. I'm a big fan of Ilya and I really want him to succeed in what he's doing. There was a book, I guess 2014. So sort of 8 years after we started working on it, Nick Bostrom, famous researcher, I think out of Oxford, came out with a book that kind of put superintelligence on the map. The name of the book was Superintelligence, and Elon Musk and Bill Gates and a lot of tech leaders read it and started recommending this is the new thing that's coming. So that was 2014. And then just a month or two ago, I think in June, we have Ilya now starting this company. So that is that evolution that is happening where you see that AI is going to become more and more powerful. And if you can get it general, then you can have super intelligent AI can do everything a human can, but like 1,000 times better or 10,000 times better. The reason that's of concern to Ilya and me and to Jeff Hinton and to many other researchers is, I mean, we're talking about something that is autonomous and can set its own goals and is 1,000 times or 10,000 times or 1,000,000 times smarter, Angelo, than you or I. And so even though we're pretty smart and we might be very good in our areas, this will be way smarter than us. So Jeff Hinton likes to give the analogy of, it's kind of imagine that, you know, frogs had invented people or something. You know, he doesn't think it worked out too well for the frogs. These people are so much smarter. The more intelligent thing is potentially dangerous. And as much as humans think that we can have rules and regulations and we'll sort of keep it in certain bounds, again, Hinton's analogy there, it's like a 2-year-old, you know, you just, do you want the peas or the cauliflower? And the 2-year-old doesn't know that it has a choice of not having either one. You know, it manipulates. And they will have read everything Machiavelli ever wrote and so forth. So there is potential danger. That's yeah, right. I mean, so if you imagine
himself, right?
Yes. I mean, imagine if you and I, Angelo, had the entire Library of Congress in our head and we could zip through it sort of in the time it takes a human to blink an eye. We could go through that multiple times and figure out what knowledge is relevant. It's just, it's very mind-boggling.
Just think about that for a second, Craig. I actually gave this analogy to family offices in creating a board. Like, imagine if on your board you could kind of have like Elon Musk, like Richard Freeman, Albert Einstein, Napoleon, Machiavelli, Da Vinci. We may hit a point, at least based on their prior intellect and what was shared, coupled with considerations to how they would react to a question that may not be in the research, but based on their past judgments. Now, I could argue that could be good because that brings to everyone incredible intellect at our fingertips. Could I argue, and normally I'm Mr. Negative, could I argue that if I'm an average 105 IQ, that's a little bit less important as a negative moving forward because I have at my fingertips or my glasses or my device that is attached and listening all the time, it's going to have the intellectual high IQ answer, and I apply my emotional intelligence, my ability to take action, and that is my human aspect to it. Am I wrong? Where am I a little off track?
No, I mean, I think that's right. So these things in the positive scenario, which again, I think is most likely, you know, AI and advanced forms of intelligence like superintelligence will tremendously amplify each of our abilities. So what you're able to do right now, imagine if you had an army of Angelos, each one, maybe not with the same emotional intelligence, but let's say they had, you know, the same or even 1,000 times greater general intellectual knowledge and ability to get things done. And they sort of talk to you, or the chief steward talks to you, and then the other army of 100 go out and sort of talk to all the family offices and do everything. I mean, that sort of thing is happening. It's happening already at a small scale. So this is real. So that's, you know, a few years out, what we just said. Let me tell you what's real right now. I can even old. So a year ago, I go to AI conference in San Francisco, one of the, you know, ground zero places for AI researchers. At the break, I'm doing an informal survey of the software guys. You know, are you using GPT and Copilot and different techniques to do coding? Because these AI models can write computer code. Oh yeah, we're doing it. I'm like, how much does it increase? Is it like 10% better, 20% better productivity? Is it 10 times better? The answer I got a year ago was 3 times, pretty much across. Everyone was getting at least 3 times. So one person was able to do the work of 3 people, and they were doing it right then, a year ago. I've seen it in marketing. I've talked to marketing guys. I need to write a, you know, press release. AI, you know, they put in just the bullet points of what they want. Out comes a press release. They tweak it a little bit. They can easily get 3 times as much work done with the same amount of brain power. This is with technology that's a year old. This thing's going so fast. Yes, it will absolutely leverage and amplify your intelligence and your ability to get things done. And we just have to make sure that there's enough proper system design and checks and balances so that it stays safe, because it's going to be so powerful, then it's got to be safe, right?
Yeah, now that does create a series of questions. We could wait till the next time, Craig, but those questions could be things like who has first access to this versus how much they cost. Money helps. And if everyone has equal opportunity, which sounds fair, the reality is we are different. We're going to have different outcomes. There's a variety of reasons for that that are way too in depth, and some of them arguably even a little too sensitive to potentially, even by my standards, which are pretty open in terms of going into. Kind of in other words, if everyone is making $1 million a year, then $1 million a year isn't $1 million a year. Inflation would wickedly skyrocket. And by nature, and now I'm getting into social issues, egalitarian, quote unquote, society, the reality is we are different. We look different. We have different IQs that may be equalized to some degree by what you're saying, including, I didn't even mention chips. But we have different risk tolerances and actions that we take. So, I mean, I hate to sound so cruel, but the reality is there will be winners and there will be losers, and there will be people, generally probably the majority, that are kind of somewhere in the middle. They're comfortable. They're not necessarily looking to be the next Elon. They're not looking to conquer the world. And I don't mean that in a military type way, just from a business perspective. Before I give you a chance to answer that, to whet the appetite for a future discussion later this year, which of course in 4 to 5 months, things will be different than now.
It'll move
What I
fast.
will whet the appetite of the audience that's live now or listening on recording is we have some incredible questions upcoming that are going to directly imply to business and then henceforth investing. So that are different than really anything else that I kind of asked Craig and others before. So be a little patient, a little bit like Rogan and Ferris and those guys. I am an advocate of long form interviews to build deep knowledge and context so you could more thoughtfully make a decision from your perspective, quote unquote, moving forward. So we still have a lot of good stuff to discuss, and maybe you want to leave my kind of comment question alone until later this year. But if you wanted to maybe tease what an answer could be, I'll give the floor to you.
Sure. So, well, let me take a moment to sort of mention something that's very, very important when talking about AI, because as you alluded to, this field is changing so quickly, right? Timelines become very, very important. When we talk about AI, we just say, well, is it going to do this? Is it going to do that? What about this problem? Will there be job loss? Will there be this? You know, so much depends on what time frame we're talking about. And it's very, very difficult to be precise about, you know, what's going to happen 2 years from now, what's going to happen 6 months from now. And I've been in this field a long time and I've spent a lot of time thinking about it, but I think I am more confident of being able to at least tell you the sequence, like this will happen before this, and then this will happen. And so in the short run, I can say a couple things that might be helpful. Short run meaning, you know, the next year, 18 months. Okay. There are great opportunities for investors to get involved in AI. I'm sure there will be many startups and small companies that come that will do phenomenally and have incredible returns. Those are very difficult to know unless you happen to be involved in one or come in contact and study it very carefully. But there are also many large companies, as we discussed in our previous interview, and I see in the comments there's some questions about this. Is all the revenue going to go to just a few players, or will some other guys have it?
And Joe, I was going to get to your question. That was actually my next question for Craig. I didn't forget about you.
So I'll try to take a partial crack at it right now. I think there's going to be revenue for lots of players, but it's a lot easier to see the large players, you know, unless you're very close to sort of what's going on in Silicon Valley and a lot of the, you know, venture community. It's a lot easier to see the large players. And for me, that's okay, because they're going to do great too. So, I mean, pretty easy to see that the people that make the computing power, the people that have control over lots of data, when I say people, I mean those companies, right? So NVIDIA, Google, Microsoft, Meta, they have lots of data, they have lots of computing power. Those are the essential ingredients that you need in the short to medium term in order to get ahead in this AI race, because the current paradigm is add more computing power and get a smarter AI, add better data and get a smarter AI. And then the third one, which is a little trickier, is add better algorithms to process the data with the computing power to get better AI. And the algorithms, as we talked about in a previous one, comes down to the people. And so, again, you kind of can look at the large companies and say, who has a good AI team? These acquisitions that are going on, you can see that they're buying the team when they don't have it, and that's fine. So that's from an investor point of view. And from a safety and human point of view, there's a limited window. These systems at some point sort of reach escape velocity, Angela, where we're talking about they're much smarter than us. If they have not been designed to be safe prior to that time, the odds of bad things happening is much higher. If we take where they are right now, where they're not as smart as us, and we still have an opportunity to shape the architecture and to try to put checks and balances and to make them democratic and have them so that you may have millions of individual agents, but each one is reflecting values of different people, and those values are all in the mix. Those kinds of design decisions can really do a tremendous amount to make the future much better for humans. And then the long term, I'll just tease with this. I think in the long term, so if we go 20 years out and let's assume everything's great and the rising tide has lifted almost everybody's boats because this technology is so powerful, some boats more than others. I don't think humans compete with AI anymore in raw intelligence. I mean, it's not a competition. It's
Right.
People versus the frogs. It's the 2-year-old versus the adult. I mean, these are not crazy people that are saying this. These are the people who've spent their entire careers and understand it better than anybody else are saying that this is what they see. And I agree with them. But, and here's the thing that I just plant the seed. I think humans have unique value in providing values that guide these systems, because there is no rational way to derive values. You can go all the way back to David Hume or Herbert Simon, who co-founded the field of AI. They both said it. AI could be really good at telling you how to get somewhere, but choosing that this is the right thing to do and this is not the right thing to do, this is right and this is wrong, that cannot be rationally derived, even if you're trillions of times smarter. That has to come from somewhere. And the logical place for that to listening and the larger human community. And I think increasingly there will be an awareness of that. And if the system is properly designed, our values will be guiding this. And so just like we don't need to know how our car works to drive, we don't necessarily need to know how every little bit of these very advanced AI systems are going to operate. If we know that they have our best interests at heart and they're aligned with human values, then that's going to be good. It's going to be really good. So I'll tease that a little bit.
No, that would be a good perspective. When I had Robinson on, my God, probably in my early Apple podcasting days in 2018, about 7 years ago, we kind of spoke, and maybe we're a little more negative, that the opportunity of being incredibly successful, of founding businesses, of becoming a billionaire, I think we're pretty good on that for probably the next 5 or 10 years. I could argue and make it harder and harder to really stand out above the crowd and be special. Now, right now, I can make the point AI might be able to help a very small team build a $1 billion company, but there may come a point when that's more complicated from a variety of different perspectives. Now, that goes into my sovereign risk. That goes into what do we really own? Are we one day going to have government controls on central bank digital currencies and our brokerage accounts, and AI attacks from foreign agents on our digital resources? I could paint a pretty ugly picture too, Craig. I'm going to really, really try not to. But those of you that would like to participate in my in-person only sovereign risk masterclasses. These are actually the kind of things that we talk about. And that was a serious comment. On another comment, I have been approached by certain families, knowing that I do often in person to the family or family office multi-day programming. I absolutely could do it on AI. And I'm not saying that Craig's going to fly with me, whatever, to Tennessee, Montana, or Florida, but I'll work and negotiate. But I could bring them in digitally. And I have other thought leaders from the investing perspective, as well as practical business management. So yes, there are actually, as part of my 3-day immersive in-person programs, inclusive of things like AI and the unique dynamics that's going to be impactful to the super rich and family offices. I mean, you're talking to someone that 24/7, the single family office community effectively is my life. So if it's impactful to that community, which obviously this is, I've been covering it so much lately, there's lots. Again, some could be good, some not so good. In the essence of time, we are going to push along a little quicker. I do want to give you a chance to talk about something you mentioned that you're doing earlier. So you're working on designs for Safe SuperIntelligence. What can you tell us about your approach, and how does it differ from others in terms of what you're doing?
Sure. So this is something my company's been working on for many years, starting in 2006, really got serious about it. And in fact, the intelligence systems that we designed that sort of got an edge in financial markets, which I did for 14 years, that was based on the idea of collective intelligence. It was the idea of, if you can get lots of intelligent entities, in that case, it was retail investors who are not known for, outperforming the Wall Street pros. But if you had enough of them, if you had millions of them and you hooked them together in the proper system, you could actually have intelligence coming out of that system that could rank in the top 10 of any hedge fund. And so we did that. So I know how to design those systems with people. And I also have the AI background. And so what I've done most recently, and what my company has done, has really, in the last 2 years, produced 1,800 pages of patents and designs for creating superintelligence that uses this approach. Let's have intelligent AI agents, which all of the companies are now sort of realizing this is the future, and they're acquiring companies to do that. Have intelligent AI agents working with humans. Very important that you include humans, because the values come from humans. If you want a safe system, you have to have humans involved for as long as possible and maximize the opportunity for them to transmit their values, their human values, to the AI system while there's an opportunity to do that. And also, from a pragmatic point of view, if you have a system, imagine a network of millions of AI agents and millions of humans, and you put a question into that network and it can give you a super intelligent response out. Anything that the AIs are not able to do in the beginning, the humans can fill in, the AIs can learn from the humans, and the next time that question comes, now the AIs learned how to do it. So they're learning from the humans in this approach, which I call a collective intelligence approach, and which we've got the equivalent of 84 normal sized patents worth of designs for this now. This approach not only scales, but very, very importantly, it's safe because you can understand how the system works at that entity level. You know the rules for one entity interacting with another entity. You know how the system as a whole made its decisions. It's very transparent. It's auditable. It's predictable. It's trustworthy. And it's smarter than anything that we have now. And it will learn the human values. So it kind of was basically a design that came from recognizing we need the most powerful system, most powerful and profitable system, because that is what's driving Silicon Valley and driving the field. And it has to be the safest. How can you design something that is both? And the safety has to be part of the design. Like, it doesn't work without the safety. And the safety, the thing that makes it safe, which is including the humans and including those values and having many, many people, so you naturally have checks and balances, that actually is also what gives you the higher level of intelligence. And it just so happens I'd spent so many years building collective intelligence systems that I could see how to do that. You simply add the AI agents in with the system designs that we'd already done and proven, and you can have this sort of approach. So that's what I'm very excited about. And whether it's, the approach that IQ has done or whether it's somebody else's approach is fine. But collectively, as a society, and especially the AI companies, Meta and Google and NVIDIA and Amazon, I mean, we need to really get focused on designing it to be transparent and safe. That's an essential, because we can make all the money in the world, and I'm obviously very in favor of making money and investments. It's why I'm here on this channel. But that doesn't matter if the thing that we design is fundamentally unsafe and wipes us out, right? So let's just make sure we do both. And the good news is it is possible to do both, and actually doing both is the fastest way to get where we want to go. So that's why I'm very optimistic, and I'm trying to just get that message out. Safety and power and profitability are aligned. They don't have to be separate, but you have to design it that way.
And Craig, which technology companies are best positioned to develop superintelligence according to the approach that you outlined?
So I really like what Meta and IBM are doing, and there's, I think, 80 other partners in the OpenAI Alliance, because they've taken, and by the way, Microsoft also has indicated they're going down this path as well. So I'm hopeful that this will be the path that almost everybody ends up going down, where you have open models. So you have access to the AIs, not in the hands of a very few people, but sort of put out there open source code. And many, many millions of developers and millions of users can customize these agents using an open framework, like the AI Alliance is sort of going down that path with Meta and IBM leading the charge. So they're well positioned. And I think that's the best approach. That'll be democratic AI, where you have checks and balances, and one agent has Angelo's values, one agent has Craig's values, one agent has Ray Kurzweil's values, and all those values are in the mix, and they can argue it out. And overall, just as a democracy, it's a messy process, but so far it seems better than most of the other dictatorial things, where you're really taking a chance. If you have the wrong concentration of power, it ends up bad for everybody. So I see that approach as being a good one. And in terms of pragmatic things, which companies are positioned, it goes back to, what do you need to have? So you need a lot of data. So who's got a lot of data? Meta has a ton of data. Google has a ton of data. Amazon has a lot of data. So data is going to be very important. Microsoft has a lot of data. And in particular, Microsoft has LinkedIn. So if you wanted agents, and you wanted some human agents in there, or you just wanted data from users to train your AI, wouldn't it be great to tap the brains of all those professionals on LinkedIn? I mean, that's a more elite type of user than maybe you would find on Instagram or something. So you could sort of, for the investors listening, if you're trying to figure out, how do I analyze this, think of the large companies, think who has data, and then think who has the quality type of data. Because what's going to happen is, right now, most of the AIs are trained on sort of commodity, everything on the internet filtered a little bit. And you're going to get mediocre performance, which is what you have with GPT. It makes a lot of mistakes, but boy, does it go fast, and it can cover any subject. But it's not so great, because we don't have Angelo's brain on there, and we don't have Craig's brain, and we don't have the people on this conference. But if there was a way to sort of tap the elite experts in different fields and get their knowledge to train the AI, well, that intelligence will go to the next level. So which companies are well positioned to do that sort of thing? That's kind of how I look at it. And then in the very short term, well, not super short, but at least 18 months, there's not going to be any let up, in my view, in demand for computing power. So if you're making the chips, I mean, you're printing money. If you're making the best chips, right? So that's NVIDIA. And there's others in the space, of course. So that's kind of how I look at it. I say what's needed and who has the materials that are needed. But then in terms of the design, I really think the open approach, the democratic AI approach, that's the one that's going to be best for all of us, and is probably going to be safest.
Are you open to working with these large technology companies?
Absolutely. My mission here, so I sold my previous company, I'm fine. And my goal is, let's implement the safest approach during this limited window that humanity has as quickly as possible. and it will be impossible not to make money at the same time because this is, there's just so much opportunity here. So I think really it's important to find someone who's committed to that open and safe approach first, and then also has the resources to scale. And then, yeah, the piece that my company has is we have the designs. We've been thinking about it for a long time, but we don't have all that data. We don't have all that computational resource. So
well, then that maybe brings up my next question, Craig. I guess I was going to state why they need you for that. These are among the world's largest companies on earth. So it's a combination of your designs, your patents, and an opportunity for one of them to potentially get an edge. And those are companies that are buying other companies, like you noted with Amazon and others.
Yeah, I think it's just a buy versus build. I fully believe that there's a lot of smart people in the world, and given it enough time, people can come to the same solution. But this is a race. And I think the reason that, you have Microsoft buying Inflection and Amazon buying Adept and getting that talent is because they realize that time is so valuable. It's much more efficient for them to acquire the talent. And if you have the designs, even better. And then they could get ahead. The current time frame for superintelligence, like Ilya and others that are the most advanced guys, I mean, people are sort of saying 2-3 years at the earliest, we could maybe get there. And probably most researchers would say it would take longer to really have it. And I'm saying I got the designs now. So if you have a 2-year advantage, that's like huge for these guys.
And Craig, and I'm going to get to some of my more business-centric questions in a second, which, yes, being a capitalist would definitely be a way for you investors and family offices of how to think the big picture and how to make money. But related to what you just described, because I think it's important that we laid a foundation in near an hour and a half, what are some takeaways for investors and family offices, which perhaps is summarizing your thoughts about the future of AI, and the future being relatively 2 to 5 years out?
So from an investor point of view, I think you have to have some investments in AI because it is so transformative. There will be a lot of volatility, so be prepared for that and do all the normal prudent things that you would do: risk management, concentration, position sizing, all those things that asset managers do. Or if they don't do them, they're going to learn that they needed to do them because the markets will teach them that eventually. So that's first thing, is you got to be invested prudently. I think the second thing is how to evaluate. You need to take a timeline approach and sort of clump things into sort of near term, medium term, long term. And as with many things, when it comes to specific investments, it gets very difficult to predict who the long-term winners are. I think it's a lot clearer to say the next 18 months, 24 months, that, if you simply follow that sort of framework of who has the computational power, or who's making the computational power that everyone wants, who has the data that everyone needs to train their models, and who has the smart AI talent. Those 3 things are what I look for. And then, not just AI talent, but good business leadership. Like Microsoft is incredible. I think Satya is just amazing. There's a lot of amazing. NVIDIA, Jensen's amazing. So, good leaders, which you would always look for, but who specifically has sort of the research talent. Those 3 things I think will give you a framework for analyzing investments sort of 18, 24 months. And then you just have to keep your eye on the space because things are moving so fast. A year ago, I asked people at the conferences I was at, what about AI agents? What about this? Oh, that's an interesting idea. We should probably put that on our list. Now it's at the top of everybody's list. And that was a year. Like, I never see things move that fast. Usually it takes 10 years to get that kind of shift that I just saw in a year.
And if people want to learn about AI safety, AGI, and kind of your company's designs for safe superintelligence, where can they go?
So you can go to IQ Company's website, which is iqco.com. Or if it's easier to remember, you could just put in superintelligence.com because we own that domain. It'll send you to the same place. There's a bunch of publications, white papers. There's brief abstracts of patents if you want to read about the patents that we've done. And there's a whole lot of videos. There's links to some of the, of course, they can find it on your site as well, Angelo, but our interviews, we have links to your site with the interviews.
Thank you.
And we have other educational videos on AI safety as well. So yeah, my main mission, let's get the word out, let's raise awareness, and we can make money at the same time. That's good too.
All good. And for my live audience, and perhaps even via recording, I guess I'm going to do a little extra bonus. So I was going to transfer now to members only in the final, let's call it half hour. I'm going to leave it open to my more public audience to give them a little bit of a taste, which I rarely do when I have a special guest on that I like to transition to the more public, to my members of SFO continuity or my consultative relationships that I maintain. But today, and maybe here and there through the year, I figured I'd open that up and share it a little bit more. I'm going to mention in my backyard, there's the iconic Ray Dalio in Bridgewater. I think a good 10 years ago, didn't they pluck like two of the top people from IBM's Watson? And I'm assuming, and also thinking of Renaissance and Simons, who passed away this year, trying to get an edge when it comes to investing. Now, no disrespect at all, but I don't necessarily know if that edge really worked out. Maybe markets are more complicated than we think. You're the perfect person because not only do you have the AI background, but you have the retired hedge fund manager perspective. So sometimes it does work out internally for the partners at Renaissance. And sometimes, like others that have tried at great expense to build internal teams, I don't know if the results have been that great.
Well, I mean, you mentioned Renaissance. So Peter Brown, who's running Renaissance, he came from IBM and had a background in, I believe, natural language processing and AI types of things. And I'm sure that has helped. I mean, Renaissance is phenomenal, right? And they're known for, not only just tremendous performance, over decades, but also being very, very good at quantitative modeling and coming up with a quantitative approach to investing. So I think for them, certainly it's worked. It is a very difficult game, right? So I was in it 14 years, every morning up at 4:30, trading tens of millions of dollars in the market, billions over the 14 years. And, it's very, very difficult for individual investors to get an edge in at least short-term trading. I think it's much easier, actually. I think we're in a wonderful time for your family offices and for even just, intelligent investors generally. This is a wonderful time. You don't have to buy every news feed that, like these quant funds probably do, every news feed that's out there for millions of dollars and every data source. And you don't need huge roomfuls of computers in order to see the general trend, which is there was an inflection point with the release of ChatGPT. There's been an incredible race to develop more advanced forms of AI because everyone has seen it can now be applied, and there's this universal interface where it can speak language to you. And so there's going to be some public companies that should do well over the long run. And I think, don't need to day trade these. In fact, I would strongly recommend not to. My personal approach is to try to position size, take a position that you can really sleep well at night, even if that thing drops 50, 60%, which it might, but you just have the confidence that over a multi-year time frame, this thing is so big. It's like being at the beginning of the railroads, right? And you sort of understood that railroads are going to go all across the country and the other people are still trying to figure out where steam power is. And you see it, you may not know exactly which railroad, but you know that the big ones will probably do well, and they're going to have their ups and downs. And if you can just ride that trend, you're going to do well. And that's what AI is for us right now, in my view.
Now, you mentioned 2 weeks ago, broadly in my public interview with you, then to my members in private, kind of 3 core reasons why your thesis, at least for the next couple of years, on even large public tech and AI companies effectively is very, very strong. And who knows, China invades Taiwan, that changes certain dynamics. Although ironically, might be good for Samsung, a chip maker that's been a little bit, not as much shine on them, but they don't rely on that connection like NVIDIA does. And I would recommend for my members going back to that private 35-minute discussion. But if you wanted in 1 minute to, here's the 3 things to look at, and yes, why that does showcase that NVIDIA, Meta, Microsoft, and there might have been one other that we mentioned, although I know they're boring because they're already part of the Magnificent Seven, but why they're likely to have a good run broadly over the next 1.5 to 3 years.
Okay, so we've talked about computation, data, and algorithms being sort of the 3 pillars.
Yeah,
but really, the thesis can be reduced to one simple statement, which is Wall Street, broadly, in my view, not investment advice, but my personal view, I believe Wall Street is mispricing the speed at which AI is going to go. And this goes back to earlier in our discussion. Humans are not good at exponentials. Exponentials is not what we normally deal with. Furthermore, almost all the large Wall Street firms, especially the quants and everybody else, is going to use 20 years of historical data to backtest whatever their thesis is. And it's not in the backtest. It's not in the historical data. What you're going to see is linear trends in that data. So if you're running into an exponential, and it really is true, that's the hypothesis, the thesis. Things are moving faster than is priced into the historical data. The firms are used to using the historical data. Options pricing, stock pricing, everything is based on that, which is why if you watch CNBC or whatever, all you see is a litany week after week, month after month of these people raising the targets as their target gets surpassed and they realize they were behind because they're pricing linearly based on the past, and they need to be thinking about the future and understanding what's going to drive it. And it's a mispricing. And whenever you have a mispricing, that's an opportunity. But you have to believe it, you have to be confident in it, and you have to position size enough that you're not going to panic. And you should talk to your own investment professional before making any decision. But that's personally what I see and what has worked well for me.
Yes, I could have something to say about the so-called investment professional. Why don't I be a little respectful and basically not say anything, but listen to my debate last week with Jamie McLaughlin on the advantage, even for sub-billion-dollar families, to have their own single-family office, to have skin in the game, to have bloodline in the game, and to take control, privacy control and customization through your own single-family office that, in theory, is 24/7 dedicated, unconflicted, and hopefully has the guts to be able to make quick decisions. But I'll jump off that high horse. For my members, I'm going to highly recommend this book, by the way. And he's not a tech person. That makes it even more intriguing, because my final 3 or 4 questions from Craig are basically going to be based off things I've read in this book by Brad Jacobs. He's a multi-time serial entrepreneur, I think 3-time billion-dollar-plus companies. He's a multi-billionaire, Greenwich, Connecticut, so an extra thumbs up a little bit from my perspective. And he wrote a book, I'm looking at it here on Kindle, How to Make a Few Billion Dollars. Members go and buy that book, How to Make a Few $billion. Wow. So my most foundational masterclass is called How to Create or Reimagine into a Top 1% Family Office. Just on what I read in that book, there's probably about 5. Now I need editing or new slides and commentary that I'm going to have to spend hours and hours this August updating, because it's too good to leave out and too valuable as that world is changing. So kudos to Brad's great book. And basically my final questions are comments or questions that he has that I think will be intriguing to get Craig's perspective, especially for my members. But I forgot I'm making this last part, effectively, broadly more open and sharing to a little bit of a larger audience. So as an active investor, somewhat trend following, is it too stark to state that humans are, it's going to be an ugly word, waning, and computers are waxing? And that simply for someone like Brad, who, I don't know, kind of in the last 30 years created 3 multi-billion-dollar public companies. he may know a thing or two, and he's not a techie. That makes it even more intriguing to me. I think it's pretty obvious. Craig, let's not try to be politically correct. Let's assume it's only 10 or 15 of my members that are going to hear this. This is a reality of especially looking 5, 10, and 15 years out. So if this is the biggest trend, how do we capitalize on it by investing in some of the public companies we're talking about, looking at more esoteric opportunities, and create businesses while we still can, wink, wink, that we have the opportunity to do. We hinted at all of this a little prior, but maybe if you had to put a bow on that part of the conversation now, and your commentary would be valuable.
So I think, again, going back to time frame, long term, I think your comment about humans waning and computers waxing, in terms of, intelligence, I think that's true. In terms of humans being the most intelligent species, arguably, some would say whales or dolphins, perhaps, but they don't have. So humans being the most intelligent species with opposable thumbs and capable of creating technology, we've been in that.
Yes, thumbs are very valuable to humans.
We've been in that enviable situation for a while now, and I think that may not last as much in the future. So I agree with that. In terms of sectors and investing, we've talked a lot about sort of in the near term. I think there's some obvious plays there. I guess one that we haven't talked much about, if you were to go to specific sectors, I have an eye on biopharma and biotechnology.
Bring it on, Greg. We want the information for our members.
And I'll tell you why, but I think it's even more helpful to understand the general principle, because I really reason about these things from knowledge of AI and then sort of using that in a reasoned way. So AI is going to be very, very good, and is already very good in any fields that are highly data intensive, and where being able to process huge amounts of data in a short amount of time and detect patterns gives you an advantage. And so medicine is one of those fields. So first of all, in medicine and biopharma, you have incredible demand. You have baby boomers, and everyone, the most valuable thing, no one wants to die. Everyone wants to, live longer, or very few people would want to die. And health is, your most important thing. So you've got a really great market there. And then it also has the characteristic that there's huge amounts of data. A single physician, the very best heart specialist, at the peak of his or her career, has only seen X number of thousand patients. But an AI can analyze a database of 10 million, every cardiac patient ever. And it can detect patterns that really good physician just didn't see it in their entire career. There's some things they didn't see. And if they did see it, their memory fades and it's hard for them to recall it all. This AI has instant recall, has a much broader experience base, is able to look at patterns, is able to analyze the patterns many times faster, like millions of times faster. And so the potential to disrupt that field and to completely change medicine is really, really high, because it's a valuable thing and because it is data intensive, or it has this data that lends itself to analysis. Similarly with biopharma and new drugs, I'm not an expert in this field, but at 100,000 feet, I know that you need to come up with new candidates for drugs. And when you pick one, it's very expensive to then push it all the way through clinical trials. So picking the right one is really, really important. Well, humans are limited in their ability of how many possibilities they can consider and how much information they can process to try to figure out, let's try candidate ABC. If you have an AI system that can look at huge databases of potential candidates, and furthermore, if they can simulate without going through the trial, but do the simulation of how this drug might work or how this one might work, they can be much more picky. They can reduce 10,000 candidates down to the top 3 instead of 100 candidates down to the top 3. And that's going to give you a huge benefit when it comes to actually developing them and pushing them through the trials, right? So that's also a logical field. Now, which specific company would do it, I can't tell you, but I can tell you that whole field is ripe for disruption because it has that characteristic of lots of data that's inherent in how the process works, and AIs are very good at processing that faster and faster and faster. So that's the way, if that helps, that's my thought process when I'm trying to evaluate which sectors might go.
No, I think that's very valuable and probably segues into my next question from Jacobs's book again. He notes, I guess, as an investor, there's several things he looks at from an industry perspective, asking how will this industry be disrupted by advances in AI? How soon could it happen? And what are the risks and opportunities in that disruption? Would you, those are pretty easy 3 things to agree on.
I think it's great. That's a great framework. Yeah, I like
that's a great framework, which probably segues into what Jacobs writes, and I'm going to read it. I looked at doing a roll-up of accounting firms, but there's a chance that accountants will be replaced by generative AI over the next decade. I could build up a big accounting business over the next few years, roll up, roll up, roll up, and see it suddenly go into a black hole because people start using AI to close the books. I don't know exactly whether that's going to happen. I don't know if there will be government controls to stop that from happening, but I believe his thesis, based on the 3 questions to be thinking about, is likely a good one, that there's going to be better opportunities for him than accounting firms as a roll-up. And by the way, he's generally deemed to be the roll-up master.
Okay. So here's a little twist I would add to that analysis. So I think he's probably generally right. It makes sense to me. So there's a trend, and we didn't spend too much time on this, so maybe I should just explain it very briefly. What's happening right now is you have the foundation models, you have the AIs, right? And they're trained on the internet data, and they get to mediocre level. And then the next step is you want them to be smarter. But what companies are doing is they're saying, wow, we're an accounting firm, for example, and we have specialized knowledge about our accountants, our accounting practices and processes, and our clients. And all of that knowledge that has been, accumulated over decades and thousands of people in the firm resides in our database systems. And that kind of gives them an edge. That's actually their strategic advantage. Yes, they have the feet on the street to go meet and greet and everything and do the work, but also a big part of their edge is that collective knowledge that they've amassed within the company. And that knowledge, that data, is not publicly available on the internet and will not be in the foundation model that is trained by Meta, Google, or Microsoft, or whoever. And so what all those companies are doing is they are taking their models, and they are, IBM the same, going to the accounting firm and saying, here's a generic base model, let's supercharge it with your data that's unique to you, that's proprietary, so that you will have your own little AI that is really good at accounting at the XYZ firm and knows all about XYZ's clients. And that will be a competitive advantage because the other AIs won't have that specialized knowledge, which is that extra 5% that takes it over the top and makes it a really good accounting AI, as opposed to more of a generic ChatGPT gives you the answers on the internet. This gives you the answers based on the best partners that have been at that firm and all the work that they've done. That's all, captured in the data. And so in industry after industry after industry, this is what's going to happen in this next little phase that's rolling out over the next, let's say, 3 to 5 years, is you're going to have these foundation models that get tuned and customized in each specialized area. And they offer competitive advantage. So given that I'm fairly confident that that's what we're going to see, and you now want to figure out, should I roll up accounting firms or should I be an XYZ business? You can ask yourself the question, does that business have a lot of specialized knowledge, or is it more of a commodity business? Is there really not much specialized accounting knowledge? If there isn't much, then maybe it will get disrupted pretty quickly. But if it does have a lot of specialized knowledge that only those partners know or only the people in that company know, and it's proprietary, then their competitive advantage is going to last longer. And AI is just going to be trained with their proprietary knowledge. And then their AI will be the best one that dominates the others in that field, if that makes sense.
Strangely enough, Craig, one of the reasons kind of why there's certain things I don't talk about that are proprietary knowledge to me on single family offices and best practices and more public forums, so they don't get eventually swooped up by the AIs and spit out for free. God forbid that impacts my capitalism and my business. So yeah, I'm being a little funny there, but I'm being accurate too. There's certain things that I only do in private to my members and my consultative relationships, and certain things I prefer to even limit what I write down or do in proprietary video that I really do more hands-on. It's a little hard to describe, and I'm not sure that I really want to describe it. But very good point. And I could say that about other industries as well that will definitively be impacted, commodity or not a commodity, insurance, paralegal, advertising, communications. These are all things where potentially it could be a great chance to be an entrepreneur now, maybe not 10 years from now, have proprietary knowledge, like you said, that could be capitalized on. But I could also argue those are industries, why don't we put it this way, that I think we'll agree on. If they don't adapt, and trust me, a good percentage of them will be way too slow. If they don't adapt, they're effectively going to dissolve as we know them. But on the positive side, let's look at what could greatly benefit over the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years by the advent of greater AI. You hinted at one of them: biotech, healthcare, longevity, retailing, manufacturing. Those are all things, robotics and the impact of that in AI, in home building, manufacturing. These are things that could potentially boom. Am I incorrect?
I think that's right. Yeah, I think there'll be tremendous breakthroughs in those fields that you just mentioned, especially in healthcare. That's, and I'm not alone in that, just to sort of not claim all the credit, I guess. So if Sam Altman founded OpenAI, right? So obviously that's what he thinks is the hottest thing. He's a talented guy. He could be doing many different things. And that's what he chose to focus on. But somebody asked him, he said, if you didn't do OpenAI, what would you do? And he said, I would do AI in healthcare. That's it. And that resonated, and it makes logical sense because there's such demand and there's such opportunity there. So I know that field's going to take off. I wish I could tell you exactly who in the field is the right one. I'm watching it, but that's something that I think we're still pretty early in the game. It's easier to see that no matter who it is, they're going to need chips.
Yes, they will. And that's going to be the easier play. Now, those are discussions we have on both public and private deals, more so in person, in what I built at SFO Continuity, including being incredibly active this summer with investor roundtables, 10X breakfast and luncheon meetings. And really the debates and discussions that we have are pretty intense and incredible in these very, very intimate groups. I think two final questions. One of them, the quote that I said earlier, I basically took again from Brad Jacobs' book, again, highly recommend it. And that is his words: I think CEOs are going to get replaced by AI, with a little bit of the, in parentheses, every human function that can be broken down into rules, systemic processes, and logical decision-making. Now, could I argue that's augmenting an existing human versus in the next 2 years literally replacing? But going back to what I said about Dalio, Bridgewater, and Watson, wasn't the original theme there to have kind of, even years ago, kind of an AGI kind of be the CEO? And I know I'm going down some interesting roads now, but the question's in your hands.
So I think probably the job of CEO, I've been a CEO for many years. Like any other job, you can do it at a mediocre level, or you can have an outstanding person. I think the outstanding people have something that will probably be much harder for AI to replace. I think if you're going through the motions and running the standard MBA playbook that they teach you at Harvard or Wharton or any business school, AI can already pass the MBA exam. So, and do really well, better than most MBA students. So I think operating at sort of a average level, I think CEO job, like any other job, will be sort of replaced in the future. But I think the people who are the very best in their field, it will take longer because they have a more complex set of skills and more, advanced and refined set of talents that it's a lot harder to train AI on. And you can almost see, given the way that AI is currently learning, right? If it's learning based on the availability of data, by definition, there's a lot of sort of mediocre CEOs, and I'm not putting CEOs down. I'm a CEO, right? So there's a lot of people that are average in any profession, and then there's only a few that are really exceptional. So there's not much data on the really exceptional ones. It's a lot easier to train someone to be at the average because there's a lot more data. When you want to get exceptional, you have to get that data and time from those exceptional people to take your AI to take it to the next level. And so that's going to be the last thing to fall. And then there's an argument that maybe there's some things that people can do that AI will never do. And I don't quite know where I stand. I'm undecided on this topic. I was trained that even things in graduate school by a very rigorous scientific advisor, that even things like intuition are just pattern recognition. I mean, there's an argument to be made. You say, well, I just feel like this is the right thing, and that's the intuition, and AI will never have that. No, you can argue that that's just pattern recognition. You've seen it so many times, you're not even aware of what you're seeing, but there's something that you're seeing that's triggering that response, and that's what you're calling intuition because you don't have visibility into what's really going on. So that's one camp. And then there's another camp that says, no, maybe there really is something that's unique that you just can't quite put your finger on. I remained open-minded on it, but I have to say that a lot of what people call intuition, a lot more than most people would probably think, is actually learnable and could be pattern recognition. Whether it's all of it or not, that I'm leaving the door open on.
I mean, great points. I mean, they could say that about the ability to play sports, to sing, music, creativity fields. Admittingly, those might be harder. To say never is just ridiculous. It's kind of a matter of decades. But whether we want that, whether we want perfection, do I want a baseball player that always gets a hit? Then it doesn't make it really special anymore. And maybe as humans, while we're still here and hopefully continuing as such, if we make some of the right decisions, which we're probably making a lot of wrong ones broadly around the world right now. And these are all topics and sensitive topics that we do like to discuss at what I've built and what I do and with my members and relationships. And I've been so fortunate learning from them and sharing together with, of course, great experts like Craig as well. I think my final question, whether you have children that are teenagers or high school, college, Craig, or whether you have nieces and nephews, you know the question I'm going to ask. They come to you and say, man, it looks like things are changing rapidly before our eyes with AI. What am I going to do? And you're not allowed to give the Pollyanna answer of follow your heart and all's going to be fine. Because the reality is that's not necessarily true. So in a serious moment, what do you tell them?
Well, I think if you can get ahead of the curve, that's always good, right? So whatever your field is, I have a son who's a dancer, and I think there's applications of AI to dance. I could see examples of, I mean, normally you'd say, wow, that's definitely a follow your heart kind of, profession. And yet, AI touches so many things. I can see where people want avatars and when they want their avatars to be graceful. And so using dance and that interface between computer science and dance and movement, that's a whole burgeoning field that's going to be there. So I think there are ways to combine, what you feel in your heart with the trends that are going on. It takes sometimes some creativity to see that, but if you're committed to it, I think they're definitely there. I mean, if it's there for dance, it's there for any field. I have another son who's a chip designer, so it's a lot easier for him. It's a straight shot there.
Yes, of course. And you did state something 3 or 4 minutes ago that I wanted to comment on because it was utterly brilliant and said better than how I would say it. So I do appreciate it. I'm probably going to have to steal it from you. I've been talking about this forever, that most family offices, by the law of mathematics and averages, are average. They fall somewhere in the middle. Some are excellent, some are subpar. Admittingly, unlike most fields, there's a qualitative nature to single family offices that makes it harder to so-called quantify whether they're great or not, other than maybe on the investing front. But I've been saying that many of you are benchmarking to mediocrity. That is not good. You wanna, which is why I label my program and some of the things I do top 1%. Now, my estimate is that about 3% of family offices are great, but saying 1% is a little more clickbaity and better. So, of course, I'm going to go with that. But I want to know what the incredible billionaire wealth creators are doing, what the most and sometimes their single family offices, what they implement, how they execute, what are their best practices, how do they process information, how do they make decision, aka governance, etc. And that is very rare to get. And I'm telling you, you're not going to get that at the moment through Chat GPT. And people like me are not going to be so open distributing all that information out there because I don't want what I define as those algorithms and such to pick that up. That's proprietary to me. I want to still make sure that I can make a living in what I do for hopefully 5, 10, 15 more years because I love it. But I do understand things change. You need to adapt. Nothing lasts forever. But I was laughing a little bit internally inside and agreeing like this when you were making that comment because it's just oh so true, maybe even more so in a opaque industry without a lot of detail like the secretive and private world of the single family office. Craig, again, for those that would like to reach out to you, maybe it's to hire you as a consultant, maybe it's to look into some of your patent and programs, whatever it might be, how could they learn more about you and your company and reach out to you?
Sure. So again, the website's probably the best. You can go to iqco.com, or if it's easier to remember, superintelligence.com. And there's a contact page. You just send me an email or whatever, and we can get in touch that way. And there's lots of information, videos, papers, patent abstracts to help people get educated. And I really hope people will spend a little bit of time. We tried to make a lot of videos that are very short, sort of, we like both. I love long form. This is the best, really. But sometimes people need just little sound bites. And so we have a lot that are just 3 minutes long as well. So yes, it's going to be an exciting new world. Angela, this has been really a wonderful, wonderful interview and great to see you again. So thank you for having me on your.
Well, you're so kind, Craig. And in my final comments, and by the way, if I could do 90 more seconds, we hit the 2-hour mark. So of course, I am going to have to do that. First of all, I'd like to thank Dr. Craig Kaplan for again coming on and having a little bit like we had a year and a half ago, more of a long form, broad discussion, but topical relative to today's times. Much of what we mentioned really has been adapting and happening in the last couple of weeks to months as we're recording this literally in mid-July here in the summer of 2024. As you could tell, I'm passionate about the subject, not just, of course, family offices, but AI and the impact that I see as someone who's generally pretty good at being revolutionary and seeing around corners and the impact it's going to have. And I'm a little loud about it. I bring the information to the forefront and I share my ideas on it. And I know for some of you, it's a little too much, a little scary. Let's put it off until tomorrow. And then tomorrow's next week, next month, next year. And that's when you get caught having problems. Like I said, in my opinion, family offices, probably in 5 years, but definitively in 10 years will be so different than they are now. And I think if you're a ultra wealthy individual and you have young ones, like they kind of get it, the Gen Z crowd. So it'll be interesting in terms of the transition of the wealth and all that and how that will play out. And that's a much broader and deeper discussion. We look to do our Unstoppable Heirs program, some of it public, some of it private, with a couple of people in that community this summer. So again, no wait, we're going at it now. But I think the opportunity of understanding AI, how it's going to impact employment, great wealth, transfer of wealth, yes, even that, and investing, the opportunity to potentially do very, very well short term and a bit longer term, I think is very impactful to my audience. And some of it I make more public, some of it I keep private. Today, at the latter 45 minutes or so, I kind of opened up a little bit of the kimono from not just my members of SFO Continuity, but a more open audience, which I'll be sharing because I did it for those of you that are live. I'll do it via some level of distributions as well. So I do encourage going to angelorobles.com and effectively, if you're qualified, joining, become a member, immerse yourself, make a decision, get off the fence. I am extremely active this summer. I've been in the community forever, for decade after decade. I sold the company very successfully. I'm extremely happy what I'm doing now, which has no hierarchy, no bureaucracy. Listen to my interview, my debate with McLaughlin, where I spoke about that effectively is a big challenge of the community. I don't want to be that old guard. I don't want to be stuck in the mud. I don't want to have layers and layers of decisions. I believe in the ability to be rigorous, but also be fast in terms of making decisions, which taking charge of your own wealth and the whole value of having or considering, at least considering a single family office, I think is very, very important. So jump on in. I love what I do with Family Office TV and giving information away, but I also want you this summer, don't wait, be one of the 30 founding members. We'll take a brief pause. There'll be a membership after that, but it won't ever quite be a founder at that same pricing and same level of advisory board of commitment that I'm making to the founders. The group will always be relatively intimate, will not be taking money from vendors and sponsors. There might be other larger events that I do or masterclass programs or even advertising on Family Office TV, but I keep what I do at SFO Continuity, the private membership club, clean. My content, my thought leadership, my original content and thought leadership, I might add, the ability to connect with me, to interact to my network, and to be part of your fellow peers who are incredible, all way more accomplished than me as an investor and often as a person and a family office, and interacting in person in New York, Greenwich, the Hamptons, Palm Beach, Miami, Jackson Hole in Wyoming. Jackson Hole is Wyoming. I meant to say, wrapping up with LA. So that opportunity and how active we are is very, very important. Again, it's pretty easy. We all try to make things more complicated than they need to be. Again, go back and watch that interview I did with McLaughlin. That was one of my core points that I make. The industry tries to confuse you because they want to have control over you by overcomplicating things. One of the advantages we have in today's society, including with technology and AI, is it does, well, you could argue this, but makes things more transparent. And that allows us to be able to take charge of ourself, our destiny, never play the victim, always be someone who moves forward. One of my favorite sayings is weak people think the world is against them. Strong people don't care if it is. Move forward. This is the opportunity. We hope you could join and be a part of it. We hope you enjoyed this interview with Dr. Craig Kaplan. And Craig, again, I appreciate it. Say hello to everyone. Have a great remainder of the summer. And I'm sure, because things are changing so rapidly, that when we reconnect, let's call it sometime maybe in the late fall, a couple of months out, that there'll be a bunch of new things to talk about because things are changing so rapidly. And I look forward to it. Thank you so much.
Me too. Thank you, Angelo.
Pleasure. Thank you.